Are we being told the truth about JFK? We're just finding out there's even more documents that none of us knew about. To help me go through this and what's going on with Trump and possibly what's going on with former President George Bush, I have Roger Stone. Roger, thank you for joining me.
Stephen, great to be with you as always.
So I want to go through the JFK files, some stuff that Donald Trump is doing, and then I'm constantly asked, how is George Herbert Walker Bush, former head of the CIA, connected to JFK? Let's go through some of this. JFK famously said something to the effect of he wanted to break up the CIA and toss 1 million pieces to the wind. During President Trump's first term, he is notorious for not using the CIA as much as other presidents, being very leery of them and the product that they were producing in the presidential report. He's even talked about making changes within the CIA. Do you believe Donald Trump will make changes to the CIA this go around? And does that put his life in danger?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think that the JFK disclosures so far are both inadequate and incomplete. Now, they did, I think, adhere to the very strict instructions of President Trump, who ordered that everything in the JFK assassination document archive be released. The problem is that much of the material that we need to see to get a fuller picture of what transpired is not in that archive. In other words, there are documents still at the Central Intelligence Agency, at the FBI, at the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the IRS, the Secret Service, and so on, that were not reviewed and turned over to the Director of National Intelligence. There's a number of notable audios that are missing. For example, the first conversation between CIA Director John McCone and President Lyndon Johnson immediately after the assassination. There's neither an audio nor a transcript included, at least so far, and that would be a pivotal conversation. The Nix film, Orville Nix, was a man on Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. He was on the other side of Dealey Plaza from Abraham Zapruder. The Zapruder film is quite famous, but the Nix film, which may or may not be exculpatory for Oswald, was seized by the government. He was filming with an 8mm camera, but he had a zoom lens and would be able, theoretically, to determine whether, in fact, Kennedy was, as the recent documentary put out by Paramount Plus, what the Parkland doctors saw, whether Kennedy was indeed shot from the front and the back. That would, of course, would be inconsistent with all of the documents that have been released so far, which seem to have been culled to create the continued impression that Oswald shot Kennedy and acted alone. As you know, I doubt that for a number of reasons, but most principally because a paraffin test that was conducted on Oswald by the Dallas Police Department indicated that he had no powder burns on his chest or his arms or his hands or his face. Had he indeed fired a $26 and therefore presumably fairly leaky World War II vintage Italian Army carbine, he would certainly have had nitrate burns on his body. He had none. The number of other things that are missing, there are oral interrogatories done with Robert Kennedy Sr., with Jackie Kennedy. Those have not been released. Then there is the investigation conducted by Walter Sheridan. He worked for Robert F. Kennedy, would later go to work at NBC. He conducted his own investigation that is thought to include both audios and videos, as well as allegedly a substantial amount of information regarding Carlos Marcello and the actions of organized crime in the Kennedy assassination. Remember, Stephen, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, formed in the 70s, already produced a report contradicting the Warren Commission, saying that organized crime played a substantial role in the murder of Kennedy, but that has not been reflected in any of the documents that we have seen. So I don't think we're getting a full picture of what's going on here, and therefore what I've seen so far seems to be designed to reinforce what I continue to believe is a false narrative, i.e. Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone nut, shot John F. Kennedy 3 times, all from the rear. I don't think that's accurate.
Okay. I've been seeing over on X, there's an audio that came out of President Lyndon B. Johnson calling Jackie Kennedy, and he's somewhat flirtatious. Hey, lady, I'm mad at you for getting out of D.C. without coming to see me, and I want to see you after Christmas, give you your Christmas spanking. And my understanding is there was not good blood between LBJ and JFK. He picked him in order to win. He was going to drop him. LBJ was actually potentially going to jail for different crimes. Have you heard that audio between he and Jackie Kennedy?
I have. I think that let's give this some context. First of all, it's important to recognize the central thesis of my 2013 New York Times best-selling book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, makes the case that it was LBJ who was the ringleader of a plot that included the Central Intelligence Agency, organized crime, Big Texas Oil, certain financial interests to kill Kennedy. Each one of those entities had their own specific reason. Johnson has the most acute motive. He is under investigation in the Bobby Baker and the Billy Sol Estes investigations. Baker was the Secretary of the Senate, Johnson's right-hand man, essentially his bag man. Billy Sol Estes was a flamboyant Texas wheeler dealer who has begotten these enormous multi-million-dollar agricultural contracts from the government, thanks to Lyndon Johnson, and he's kicking back to Johnson. Only weeks ago, Billy Sol Estes' grandson released an audio tape in which there's a discussion between his grandfather, Billy Sol Estes, who's also wrote an excellent book, and Cliff Carter, who is the executive director of the Democrat National Committee, the chief political operative for LBJ, in which they openly discussed the fact that Johnson hired a man named Malcolm Mac Wallace to kill Kennedy. I believe, based on the fingerprints found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, and at least 6 eyewitnesses who identify a man in the window who meets the physical description of Wallace, middle-aged, heavy-set, balding, with glasses, that Wallace is far more likely the shooter. We now have this audio tape, which I think confirms that. That does not absolve the CIA. It doesn't absolve organized crime, as the Paramount Plus film indicates. I think there are multiple gunmen. I think there are multiple shooters. I think Kennedy is shot from the front and the back. Indeed, what you say is true. I believe that both Jackie Kennedy and Robert Kennedy Sr. Both suspected Johnson's involvement of the murder of JFK. But there's a very strange reference in that audio you refer to, in which Jackie talks about coming by the White House to get an injection of what she believes is B-17. Now, someone of her wealth, someone of her stature could go to any doctor to get a B-17 shot. I believe that this is consistent with one of the other things I say in my book, which is that President John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy were both being attended by Dr. Max Jacobson, also known as Dr. Feelgood. Dr. Jacobson was attending many of the beautiful people of the time. Pablo Casals, Frank Sinatra, Joe DiMaggio, Marilyn Monroe, Leonard Bernstein, Pablo Picasso, Nelson Rockefeller. And he's shooting them all up with a proprietary blend of methamphetamine. And I think this explains why Kennedy, who was taking the injections for the horrific pain in his back, he was a World War II hero, very badly injured when his PT boat, the 109, was cut in half by a Japanese boat. I believe he's taking it for purposes of the pain, but it makes him very randy. Also explains why he's chasing 18-year-old interns around the White House, according to Dave Powers, one of Kennedy's aides. So I think that injection she refers to is the one that is being administered to JFK. I think it is further proof that Kennedy was addicted to methamphetamine. He didn't know that. I think he believed it was a proprietary blend of vitamins and enzymes. I actually think that this is one of the ways the deep state rationalized the murder of Kennedy. If you go on the Air Force One manifest of those traveling to the Vienna summit with Nikita Khrushchev, you'll find Dr. Max Jacobson on the manifest. There's an excellent book on this called Dr. Feelgood, which documents his treatment of JFK, which I think played a role ultimately in Kennedy's murder. The deep state, the military thought that, well, Kennedy's a drug addict. He could give away the store to Nikita Khrushchev.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I remember her saying, "I'll come by and get that shot." I was focused on him talking about giving her a Christmas spanking, and the fact that they kind of sounded flirtatious, even though my understanding was there wasn't a good relationship between them. So I had forgotten about that shot. Thank you for reminding me about that. And the IRS is the largest collection agency in the world, and with April 15th fast approaching, it's more aggressive than ever. In 2025, enforcement has ramped up. And if you owe back taxes or have unfiled returns, waiting is not an option. The longer you do, the worse it gets. Ignoring your tax troubles is the worst thing you can do. April 15th marks another tax year that has passed you by. Getting ahead of this now is the smart move, but never, never, never contact the IRS alone. Instead, let experts at Tax Network USA handle it for you. They have a preferred direct line to the IRS and know exactly what to say and what not to say. Whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million, Tax Network USA's attorneys and negotiators can help you. They've already resolved over $1 billion in tax debt. Talk with a strategist today. It's free. Stop the threatening letters. Stop looking over your shoulder. Protect yourself, your property, your family. Don't let the IRS control your future. Call 800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Gardner. April 15th is around the corner. The IRS is acting. Now it's your turn. And then, yes, I remember when I read your book, it talked about that justification of, well, if this guy's a drug addict, I mean, we got to get him out of the White House. And people have to remember at this time, they were thinking about secretly, nuclear bombing Russia in the middle of the night. The fear of communism was absolutely rampant. Okay, going back to the files. So Pam Bondi releases 80,000 unredacted files. Then just last week, I read that the National Archives released like another 15,000 documents. And you're saying that we're missing stuff from CIA, IRS, Social Security. Do you think we're ever going to get those documents? Or as you say, the government wants to keep the conspiracy going and they would rather that people continue to believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald?
Just a slight correction. I think it was Tulsi Gabbard who announced that the National Archives would release these documents. And we still have, I think, roughly another 30% of the documents are yet unreleased. So we still don't know everything, but there are a number of things that are already conspicuously missing. Now, Congressman Tim Burchett and others wrote to the president urging him to broaden his order to include documents that hadn't been put in the document archive from all of these other departments. Don't know that we'll ever see those. So what we've seen so far is interesting. It shows the CIA dissembled about their early knowledge of Oswald. It shows that their head of counterintelligence, James Jesus Angleton, destroys a number of files. It shows that the KGB had identified Oswald as a poor shot. That's consistent with my own research. He had the lowest rating from the U.S. military, the U.S. Marine Corps. By the way, Mac Wallace had the highest rating as a Marine Corps veteran, as a sharpshooter, as a marksman. I still think that what we have seen has been carefully culled to continue to push the false narrative that Oswald acted alone and that he was just a random nut. I think there's more than enough evidence that Oswald is in fact both known to the intelligence services much earlier than they say. That's probably because in most cases, I think he is an informant. It is very odd, for example, that he defects to Russia, but then he easily returns to the United States without any problem. That's highly unusual. It's also clear that he's being for someone who's supposedly a Russian communist. They have him acting in New Orleans, trying to cause a scene. He gets arrested in New Orleans, handing out pro-Castro handbills. And when he goes to jail, who does he call? Does he call his wife? Does he call his lawyer? No, he calls the station chief of the FBI in New Orleans, and he's almost immediately released. So I don't think we don't even have a smidgen of the entire picture here. We understand the motives of Johnson. Kennedy had indeed begun telling people that LBJ would be dropped from the ticket, would probably be prosecuted. We understand the motives of the CIA. They blame Kennedy for the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion. I dug into this, and for years, conservatives criticized Kennedy for failing to order air support for the Cubans who were storming the beaches at the Bay of Pigs in that 1962 invasion. But in fact, the plan that Kennedy approved included air cover from 29 Panamanian flagged bombers that were supposed to be flown by Cuban pilots. And that was canceled by Charles Cable, the number 2 man at the CIA, the day before the invasion. Then when the invasion turns into a fiasco, Curtis LeMay, head of the Air Force and a hardline warmonger seeking war with Russia, says to Kennedy, the only way we can save the day is by sending in the Air Force. Well, that violates the premise of the entire invasion, which Kennedy only approved if he had plausible deniability. This was supposed to look like a indigenous Cuban uprising, not a U.S. invasion of Cuba. So he denies that air cover, and of course he takes the blame for that fiasco. And then there is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, you and I have been told in song and fable and film that brave Jack and Bobby Kennedy faced down Nikita Khrushchev, who removed his missiles from Cuba. Unfortunately, that's not true. 50 years later, documents are declassified that tell us that the Kennedys made a secret deal with Khrushchev to remove our missiles from Turkey and Italy in return for a pledge to remove the Russian missiles from Cuba. But that agreement has no on-site inspection. So this, I think, added to the methamphetamine issue we raised earlier, creates the deep suspicion of the CIA, or the hatred for Kennedy, and Kennedy's deep suspicion for the CIA. Then you have organized crime. As I said earlier, I mentioned Carlos Marcello. Now, Marcello and Santo Trafficante, who ran the mob in Florida, have reached an agreement before the 1960 election to both give $1 million to John Kennedy's campaign and also to twist arms for him in Illinois, in the West Virginia primary, firstly, but then in Illinois and in Texas. And I think that explains his razor-thin victory over Vice President Nixon. In return, Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, John Kennedy's father, has agreed to have the new Kennedy Justice Department back off their efforts to deport Marcello and Santo Trafficante. Marcello ran the mob in Texas and Louisiana. Trafficante ran the mob in Florida. Bobby Kennedy becomes Attorney General. Ambassador Kennedy is felled by a debilitating stroke. He can no longer enforce the deal that he's made. Robert Kennedy goes after the mob bosses, hammer and tong. They feel double-crossed. There are jail cell bugging recordings of Marcello bragging about his role in Kennedy's murder, both before and after the murder. So I think to get a complete picture, you would have to see all of this. None of the documents released so far address the question of organized crime. Yet again, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, formed in the 70s because of widespread doubts about the accuracy of the Warren Commission, specifically says that organized crime was involved based on their investigation. By the way, the CIA stonewalled that investigation, would turn over no documents, would provide no testimony.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm sure every person who's become president since then has wondered what's going on. I want to talk about George Herbert Walker Bush's role as head of the CIA at that time, and then you had some unique insight from President Nixon directly. What is is there any connection between President George Herbert Walker Bush and the JFK situation? Look, I don't know your exact situation, but if you're like the thousands of homeowners, American Finance can help you. You're struggling to keep your head above water. You're barely making ends meet. You're drowning in high interest rate credit cards and debt. It's not your fault. Life got more expensive. Inflation hit everyone hard. But if you're carrying credit card balances with over 20% interest and you have a mortgage that sits untouched, you're ignoring what could be the thing that turns it all around for you, your home equity. And this is where American Financing can help. Would you trade 10 minutes for a shot at saving on average $800 a month? That's $10,000 a year, because that's exactly what homeowners are doing when they call American Financing. A simple, no obligation call could change everything. They have a team of salary-based mortgage consultants, so there isn't any incentive to put you into a loan that doesn't make sense. Plus, there's no upfront fees to find out how much they can save you. Call them right now at 888-686-8030. Again, that's 888-686-8030. Or visit americanfinancing.net/Gardner. Stop paying high interest. Use your house as a tool. Save money today.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that in 1963, George Herbert Walker Bush is still a Texas oil man. His company, Zapata, is widely thought to be a CIA front. He, for 30 years, says he can't remember where he was on the day Kennedy was shot. Now, everybody remembers where they were of that age. I certainly do. But in fact, he was in Dallas, Texas. He stayed at the Sheraton Hotel, just steps from Dealey Plaza, on the night of the 21st. I believe that he actually flew to Tyler, Texas, which is a short flight, to give a lunchtime speech. He was beginning to run for the U.S. Senate. He was the Republican nominee for the Senate in 1964. He gave a lunchtime speech. But what's curious is that immediately after hearing about the assassination of JFK, he calls the FBI field office in Houston, where he knows the station chief, and he tells them about a young Republican in Harris County, that's Houston, who he heard may or may not have made threats against the president But I think the real reason that he's calling is to establish an alibi that he is in Tyler, Texas. Now, I know there is a picture of a man who looks like George Bush standing in front of the Texas School Book Depository building. I don't understand how that's possible, because the local newspaper in Tyler reports his lunchtime speech. I think it's to the Rotary Club. But it's interesting. He tells the FBI man in Houston that it is his plan to fly from Tyler back to Houston. But that's not what he does. He flies back to Dallas, stays overnight in Dallas, and then goes back to Houston the following morning. If he had a role here, I think it may have been, it is clear that he was a CIA functionary earlier than thought. One of the documents that has been discovered is a memo from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover directing those in the Bureau to brief George Bush of the CIA on the activities of right-wing anti-Castro Cubans in the Dallas area. Now, the CIA seems to have gone to great lengths to say that that is a different George Bush. And we find that there is a man named George Bush who's a federal employee who gets transferred from like GSA over to the CIA for reasons he never understood, and then transferred back. This appears to be a cover. I think George H.W. Bush, who's very junior at that point, is a fundraiser for the Kennedy assassination. I make a pretty good case in my book that the entire operation was financed by big Texas oil interests. But he did not become CIA director till much later in his career. Remember, this is 1963. He doesn't become CIA director until 1976. And even then, he's only confirmed by the Senate after agreeing that he would not run for president or vice president in 1976. Bush aspired to be on the ticket with Ford. Don Rumsfeld, who was his arch rival, who was the White House chief of staff at that time under Ford, engineered this deal in which Bush had to agree that he would not run in order to get the Democrat votes to be confirmed in the U.S. Senate. This is a grudge that he long held against Rumsfeld.
Okay, so hold on. George Bush Sr. had bad blood with Donald Rumsfeld, but then Rumsfeld ends up taking a big cabinet position under his son?
Yes, I actually think that there was bad blood between Rumsfeld and Cheney and George H.W. Bush. They both aspired to be president. Rumsfeld actually aspired to be vice president with Ford himself, and he kind of got Bush conveniently out of the way by pigeonholing him in the CIA job. I think the relationship between George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush very accurately depicted in Oliver Stone's film. George W. Bush is very anxious to show his father that he's not the black sheep of the family. Remember, it was Jeb who was supposed to be president, not W. It was Jeb who was supposed to win the governorship of Florida. Jeb was not favored to win the governorship of Texas. And I think this is his way of showing his father that he's his own man. It was also his undoing, because I don't think there is a more skillful bureaucratic infighter or operator than Dick Cheney, who, as we now know, lied us into war on the basis of a bunch of false assertions. The Iraqis had nothing to do with 9/11. They told us otherwise. Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, specifically did not have yellow cake uranium to build nuclear weapons. The entire premise for the Iraq War, driven by Vice President Dick Cheney, was based on a lie.
Okay. Does Donald Trump have bad blood with the Bush family because of your book about the Bush crime family, or did he have personal reasons to not like them, or was it just the fact that we spent trillions of dollars on a useless war and killed a bunch of people over a lie? What's the relationship between Bush and Trump?
It is certainly strained today. There was a time in 1988, I was there when Donald Trump had a fundraising reception for George H.W. Bush at the Plaza Hotel in New York, raised quite a bit of money for his presidential campaign. I think that in the beginning, he was a supporter of George W. Bush because he thought his predecessor, Bill Clinton, was a disaster. He was, I think, turned off by the war. Trump is a non-interventionist. He understood that the reasons they gave us for the war in Iraq were false. And I think that is the beginning of his disillusionment with the Bushes. And then, of course, it's very clear that when he ran for president in 2016, most of the members of the Bush family endorsed Hillary Clinton. When he ran again in 2020, they were not for him, and they certainly weren't for him in 2024. So I think it's because they are neocons, and he's an America firster. They are not only different branches of the party, but Trump's nomination in 2016 is essentially the hostile takeover of the Republican Party as previously owned by the Bushes. Under the Bushes, the Republican Party was the party of the neocons, the party of war, the party of Wall Street, the party of big business, the party of the elites. Donald Trump has transformed this into being the party of the middle class, the party of working people, the party of peace, the party of free speech, party of prosperity, the party of tax reduction. Remember, George H.W. Bush referred to Ronald Reagan's tax cuts as voodoo economics, whereas Donald Trump was a strong supporter of Ronald Reagan's tax cuts. The tax cuts put forward by JFK, the tax cuts put forward by Reagan, the tax cuts put forward by Trump have all sharply increased federal revenues. So the narrative that our deficits or our inflation was caused by these tax cuts is absurd. Inflation and the deficits are caused by a spending problem that I think is now being documented by Elon Musk and the folks at Doge.
Okay. Why? Let me leave JFK just for a minute because this question's been on my mind. Why does President Trump want the Department of Education to go away? Is it because he so strongly believes in school choice? Is it the fact that he can easily pull up these blue cities with Democrat leaders and read, wait a minute, 90% of students don't know how to read or do basic math? We've got to do better than this. What is the reasoning for getting rid of the Department of Education created by Jimmy Carter?
I think that the president feels that education policy is best handled by local school boards, and that it has turned out the federal Department of Education has really just been used to try to push a DEI and transgendered agenda on the public schools. There is no role for the federal government in education. Now, federal funding for education is not being zeroed out. It will just now go to local school districts, and local school boards can make much better decisions about how to inculcate and educate students than this giant federal bureaucracy. President Reagan also, as you know, pledged to terminate and do away with the Department of Education, was never able to do so. I think this is one of Trump's more important accomplishments. It has to do with local control, and also the fact that this bureaucracy has been pushing this agenda, this ideological woke agenda that has been rejected by the American voters in the last election.
Okay. I've read online, but I don't fully understand it, that many say the Department of Education has simply become a money laundering operation for the Democrat Party. They push big money their way, they educate their way, and then those people donate back to Democrat people. For example, when I covered the lockdowns, I remember Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi pushing for nearly $300 billion to go to school systems. I've not read any of that money actually making education better. Was the Democrat Party using the Department of Education as a money laundering scheme?
I think Elon Musk and Doge would be in a much better position to answer this than I do, but it is clear that just the formulation of the Department of Education is a payoff for the teachers union. And the teachers union is not about good teachers. It's about a lockstep ideology. It's about pushing this woke agenda. So I think the president's done the right thing by doing away with this. There's a special election in upstate New York coming to fill the seat of Elise Stefanik. It sounds to me like the Republican Party bosses are pushing a candidate endorsed by the teachers union, a fellow by the name of Dan Steck. I think Mr. Steck should be asked, does he support President Trump's decision to do away with the Department of Education, like his opponent Anthony Constantino does, for example? I think that this is a flashpoint issue for Republicans, and it's one that needs to be aired in that contest. And I think the president has done a very good job of explaining why he's doing away with the Department of Education.
Okay. People have been very critical of President Trump being unable to end this war between Russia and Ukraine. In his final days, Biden rushed as many billions of dollars as he could to Zelensky. We're not now finding out much of that money, much of those weapons never arrived. So Trump, is being hamstrung. Zelensky, Europe, they don't seem to want this war to end. From my perspective, it seems Putin's more interested in the war ending than Zelensky. And then, there's this talk of a ceasefire, a peace agreement. Trump begs for the life of these 2,500 Ukrainians surrounded by Russia. And what does Ukraine do after saying we'll seek peace? They start bombing deeper into Russia. Does Ukraine really want this war to end?
There's no evidence that they do. I think this is all being manipulated by the European Union. Remember, under Joe Biden, we had no peace talks going at all. There was no dialogue going. Trump understands it takes two to tango. He has to get the Russians and the Ukrainians to the table. After being accused repeatedly of being in the tank for Putin, he had to threaten the Russians with sanctions, bank sanctions, and tariffs in order to get them to agree to a temporary ceasefire. Then Zelensky agrees to a ceasefire, appears now to have violated that agreement. I think the president is committed to peace. No one ever thought that this was going to be easy. Zelensky continues to be propped up by the European Union nations, and they have an interest in long-term war. Again, the false narrative that this war is about the territorial ambitions of Vladimir Putin. And I have no great love for the Russians. Members of my own family were mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956. But it is absolutely clear that we agreed in two different agreements with the Russians, the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk Accords, that we would not push Ukraine into NATO. More precisely, that we would not mount NATO missiles on the ground in Ukraine pointed at Russia. And this is what Zelensky really objects to. It's been his line in the sand from the beginning. We have this ongoing push, despite our two signed agreements, for Ukraine to join NATO, which is really about the missiles and presumably the bioweapons labs. I don't think this is any different than our own situation in the United States in 1962, when the Russians mounted missiles in Cuba 90 miles off our shore. We objected. So this false narrative that Putin is going to gobble up Ukraine, and then he's going to take Poland, and then he's going to take Germany, then he's going to take France, this is nonsensical. It has no basis in reality. The president is seeking to end this war and do so as quickly as possible, but no one ever thought it would be easy, particularly with the European Union propping Zelensky up. Nonetheless, we have put up more than $200 billion, more for the defense of Ukraine than any of the Eastern European allies. Seems to me that this is a bigger problem for them than it is for us. But the president has demanded that they pay their fair share, and I think he's right about that.
Yeah, from my very limited young perspective, Europe seems very willing to support Ukraine with American money. So
Well,
it's like it's our money, our weapons, but they're very supportive cheerleaders of that. And then you find out that behind the scenes they've been buying more Russian oil than they've actually put into defending Ukraine. And then you have to go, okay, follow the money, put your money where your mouth is. It seems like Trump sees behind the curtain with what Ukraine is trying to do. Okay, final question. Actually, two more, and I appreciate you coming on. Have you heard any rumblings of a game plan or how Trump and Bondi are going to handle these lower federal judges that keep undermining the sitting president of the United States? Chuck Schumer went on and said, they're doing great. We installed 235 judges that think like us, and they're doing a great job. How do we overcome these lower judges?
Well, I think Stephen Miller is absolutely right when he says these judges are exceeding their authority. They do not have the statutory authority to challenge the president's executive ability to make decisions regarding the foreign and domestic policies of the country. If you think about this, we have a federal judge in D.C. who says that the president doesn't have the authority to deport dangerous criminals and terrorists from the country. I think it should be the president's view that he will listen to a 3-judge appeals panel on these questions. Matt Gaetz was on my 77 WABC radio show yesterday, and he's a lawyer. I'm not, but he actually said that he thinks that the administration should ignore these orders. The enforcement mechanism would be through the Department of Justice. I'm not quite certain how that will work. It's interesting to see the mainstream media deal with this. For those who say, oh, just impeach these judges, I don't think people understand how complicated and difficult a process that is. The House Republicans can impeach. That means indict a judge. Although it's questionable about the grounds, it would seem based on law that only malfeasance, criminal activity, philosophical differences are not supposed to be the grounds for impeachment. But more importantly, then it requires a 2/3 vote of the U.S. Senate, which I think is highly unlikely. So the administration has to appeal all of these decisions. Meanwhile, there are people still in danger in this country from terrorists, from violent criminals. Meanwhile, they continue to ignore the president's order to lay off federal employees to save money. We have another federal judge who said that Elon Musk and the folks at Doge should not be allowed to have access to Social Security records. Well, he is an extension of the executive. The president has the authority to vest in him the executive authority to look at those records. We have another federal judge saying that he can't shut down the Department of Education. We have yet another federal judge who says that he can't bar transgendered people from the military. All of these things are designed to stymie his America First agenda. I don't profess to know the answer. I'm not an attorney, but I do know that the American people voted for these changes, and I think the president ends up fighting it out in court, I guess.
Yeah, I believe that's true. Okay, so we have Roger Stone, author of The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. Final question. What was the commentary that Richard Nixon, President Nixon, shared with you about LBJ and the assassination of John F. Kennedy?
Well, you can find this in my book. I also have a Substack piece, which I think will be posted any minute now. It's very simple. In his post-presidential years, I was working for former President Nixon. I was in his home in Saddle River. And after work, over a couple cocktails, he could get fairly loquacious when he had a drink or two. And I screwed up my courage to ask him, Mr. President, who really killed Kennedy? And he looked deeply in his glass for a moment, looked up at me and said, well, let me say this. The Warren Commission was the biggest goddamn hoax in American history. I said, I'm sorry, sir. What do you mean? He said, well, let me put it to this way. Lyndon and I both wanted to be president, but I wasn't willing to kill for it. that was the impetus for me to write this book. By the way, you can get your copy by going to themanwhokilledkennedy.com, themanwhokilledkennedy.com. If you choose to buy it elsewhere, get the paperback version, has 3 additional chapters. But in the book, you'll learn that Jack Ruby, who we saw on national television kill Lee Harvey Oswald, was known to Nixon, that Nixon had, at the request of Congressman Lyndon Johnson, had used excess staff money to put Jack Ruby, then going under the name Jack Rubenstein, his real name, on the House payroll as an informant for the House Un-American Activities Committee. So we also, Tucker Carlson, featured a recent audio from the famous Watergate tapes, the Oval Office tapes, in which you can hear President Nixon telling the CIA director, Richard Helms, in a terse conversation in which Nixon is trying to pressure the CIA to provide him cover in the Watergate scandal. And he says, a lot of dirty business happened over there, Dick. A lot of things that I know had to be done. And when Helms tries to pretend what Nixon doesn't know what he's talking about, or that Helms probably doesn't know what Nixon's talking about, Nixon says, look, I know who shot John. There it is for everybody to hear. It's all in my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy. Get it at themanwhokilledkennedy.com.
Okay. I will definitely put a direct link to that. I'm just starting the Bush crime family book, so I don't want to get into that until I've read it. But I loved this book. I highly recommend it. It was entertaining, educational, definitely not a textbook. You did a phenomenal job. I want to put a direct link to that. If people want to catch your show, where can I point them, Roger?
They can go to stonezone.com, which is my website. They can also go every day at 8 p.m. Eastern to WABCradio.com, WABCradio.com in New York. It's also now syndicated in a number of other cities, but any place worldwide, you can go to WABCradio.com at 8 p.m. Eastern every night. And today we have Mike Davis, I believe, from the Article 3 project. Tomorrow, Callie Means joins me to talk about the move to make America healthy again. So check it out, WABCradio.com, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern.
Okay, I'll put those direct links down below. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephen. Great to be with you.